Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. The house was quiet when I finally pulled into the driveway, later than I'd planned. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, leaving only a sliver of twilight to cast faint shadows on the suburban street. I'd taken my time, perhaps more than I should have, stopping at the bakery on the corner for a decadent chocolate cake, and then at the liquor store for a bottle of champagne. Tonight was supposed to be special. A surprise for Ella, my wife. Something to bring us closer after weeks of what felt like increasing distance. I unlocked the front door, stepping into the familiar warmth of our home, though tonight, it felt slightly off. The silence was too complete, the house too still. The kids were at Ella's mother's for the night, an arrangement Ella had suggested so she could catch up on some work without distractions. I had no reason to doubt her. She'd been so busy lately, managing the kids, the house, her part-time job, and still finding time for the occasional volunteer work at the school. But tonight, something gnawed at me, a small knot of unease in my gut that I couldn't quite place. I set the cake and champagne down on the kitchen counter, taking a moment to glance around. The living room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the soft glow of the lamp by the piano. It was Ella's pride and joy, an old grand piano that had been in her family for generations. She spent hours there, playing melodies that seemed to float through the house like a gentle breeze. The kids loved it, too, especially our youngest, Sophie, who'd just started lessons at the local music school. Ella had insisted on private lessons, wanting the best for her. I'd agreed, of course. I'd always trusted Ella's judgment when it came to the kids. But as I moved towards the living room, I heard it, a faint sound, almost imperceptible at first. Music. A soft, lilting tune, played with a skill that I knew wasn't Ella's. It was more refined, more practiced. And then, under the music, something else. A murmur of voices, low and intimate. My heart began to pound, each beat echoing in my ears as I followed the sound, feet moving silently across the carpeted floor. The living room opened before me, and there they were. Ella and the young music teacher she'd hired for Sophie, a man I'd met only briefly a few weeks ago. His name was Mark, tall, with dark hair and a boyish charm that I'd thought was harmless. He was seated at the piano, fingers moving gracefully over the keys, while Ella was draped across the bench beside him, her body languid, her lips curved in a smile I hadn't seen in months. Ella. My voice was barely above a whisper, but it sliced through the air like a knife. They both froze. Mark's hands fell from the keys, the music dying instantly. Ella's head snapped up, her eyes widening in shock as she saw me standing there, the cake and champagne still clutched in my hands. For a moment, none of us moved, the silence between us thick and heavy. David, Ella's voice was shaky, her usual confidence gone. She scrambled to sit up, but the movement only drew my attention to her state of undress. Her blouse was unbuttoned, exposing the delicate lace of her bra, and her skirt was hiked up around her thighs. The realization hit me like a freight train, leaving me breathless and reeling. What is this? My voice was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that comes just before a storm. Mark rose to his feet, his face pale. Mr. Hargrove, This isn't what it looks like. I dropped the cake, the box hitting the floor with a dull thud. The champagne bottle followed, rolling away as it clattered against the hardwood. Isn't it? I took a step closer, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. Then tell me, Mark, what exactly am I looking at? Ella stood up, moving between us as if to shield him. David, please, let me explain. I shook my head, the anger boiling over now, too hot to contain. Explain. What is there to explain, Ella? I come home to surprise my wife, and I find her half naked with another man. What could you possibly say to make this right? Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no pity. Not now. Not with the betrayal so raw, so fresh. It's not. It wasn't supposed to be like this. It just happened. I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. Just happened? How convenient. I looked at Mark, who was standing there, looking as though he wanted to vanish into the floor. Get out. Now. David, wait, Ella started, but I silenced her with a look. Out. Both of you. Mark didn't need telling twice. He grabbed his coat and practically ran for the door, his footsteps echoing down the hallway as he fled. Ella hesitated, her eyes pleading with me, but I turned away, unable to bear the sight of her. The woman I'd loved, the mother of my children, reduced to this, a stranger I could no longer trust. I'm sorry, David, she whispered, but her apology was hollow, meaningless. I didn't respond, couldn't find the words. Instead, I walked to the piano, where the remnants of their duet lingered in the air, and slammed the cover shut. The sharp sound echoed in the silence, final and unforgiving. By the time I turned around, Ella was gone, the front door closing softly behind her. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the place where she had been, my mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. The house was quiet once more, but the stillness was different now, empty, devoid of the life that had once filled it. I knew, in that moment, that nothing would ever be the same again. This was the end of the life I had known, and the beginning of something far darker. The morning after was harsh, as if the world had shifted overnight and left me standing on unfamiliar ground. I hadn't slept. Instead, I spent the night pacing the house, my thoughts circling like vultures around the carcass of my marriage. The betrayal was a wound that refused to close, festering with every passing hour. I stand at the kitchen counter, staring at the remnants of the cake and champagne from the night before. The cake is a mess of chocolate crumbs, smeared across the floor where I'd dropped it, and the champagne bottle sits awkwardly on its side, half empty and forgotten. It's a perfect metaphor for what my life has become in the span of a few hours. The sound of my phone ringing startles me out of my thoughts. I glance at the screen, Ella's name flashes across it, her picture smiling up at me from happier times. I let it ring, watching as the call goes to voicemail. There's nothing she could say that would make this better, nothing that could undo the damage she's done. But the phone keeps ringing, this time a different name on the screen. David, pick up, says the voice on the other end. It's Roger, my best friend since college. He's never been one for pleasantries, and his voice carries a sense of urgency that slices through my numbness. I pick up the phone and put it to my ear. Roger, I manage to say, my voice hoarse. David, where are you? His tone is sharp, more demanding than concerned. At home, I reply, looking around the kitchen as if I needed to confirm my location. Where else would I be? Good. Stay there. I'm coming over, he says, not giving me a chance to respond before he hangs up. I stare at the phone, the silence that follows his abrupt end to the call almost comforting in its familiarity. Roger doesn't know what's happened. At least, not yet. But I know that once he's here, the floodgates will open, and I'll have to tell him everything. 15 minutes later, there's a knock on the door. It's not the usual knock, a quick, casual rap that Roger uses when he visits. This one is harder, more insistent. I open the door to find Roger standing there, his face set in a grim expression. Behind him, unexpectedly, is his wife, Julie, her eyes wide with concern. David, Roger says, his voice low, controlled. He steps inside, Julie following closely behind. What the hell happened? I close the door behind them, the sound of it shutting like a finality I'm not ready to face. You should sit down, I say, gesturing to the living room. They exchange a look but follow my lead, settling on the couch while I remain standing, unable to find the will to sit. Julie leans forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. David, you look terrible. What's going on? And so, I tell them. Every word feels like an incision, cutting deeper as I recount the events of the night before. The way I found Ella, the betrayal, the confrontation. By the time I finish, the room is thick with tension, the air heavy with unspoken emotions. "Jesus Christ," Roger mutters, running a hand through his hair. He looks at me, his eyes narrowing with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I can't believe she did that. Ella, she always seemed so, together." "She was," I say, more to myself than to them. "At least, I thought she was." Julie reaches out, placing a hand on my arm. "David, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine what you're going through right now." Her touch is gentle, comforting, but it only serves to remind me of what I've lost. I pull away, crossing my arms over my chest. "I don't know what to do," I admit, my voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like my whole life just fell apart in a single moment." Roger leans back against the couch, his expression thoughtful. "You need to talk to a lawyer. Start thinking about what comes next. This isn't just about you and Ella anymore, it's about the kids, too." The mention of the kids makes my heart lurch. Sophie, our youngest, who still believes in fairy tales and happy endings. Ben, our oldest, who's just starting to understand the complexities of the world around him. How do I explain this to them? How do I shatter their innocence with the truth of what's happened? I don't want to drag them into this, I say, my voice firm despite the turmoil inside me. They're too young to understand. Julie shakes her head. "They're going to find out eventually, David. It's better if it comes from you, in a way they can understand. You can't protect them from this forever." "I know," I admit, the weight of her words settling heavily on my shoulders. "But I just need time to figure out how to do that." Roger stands, walking over to the kitchen and returning with a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses. He pours a generous amount into each, handing one to Julie and then to me before taking his own. "To figuring it out," he says, raising his glass. "And to making sure that bastard doesn't get away with this." I raise my glass, but the toast feels hollow, empty. I take a sip, the burn of the alcohol doing little to numb the pain. "I don't know if I can do this," I confess, looking at the liquid swirling in the glass. "I don't know if I have the strength." "You do," Roger says, his voice steady and sure. "You're stronger than you think, David. And you're not alone in this. Julie and we're here for you, whatever you need." Julie nods in agreement, her eyes filled with a sincerity that brings a lump to my throat. "You've always been there for us, David. Now it's our turn to be here for you." The room falls into a quiet lull, the 3 of us sipping our drinks in a silence that's more comforting than awkward. I feel a small flicker of gratitude toward them, toward their unwavering support, their willingness to step into the chaos of my life without hesitation. But as the alcohol takes effect, loosening the tight knot of tension in my chest, I can't shake the feeling that this is only the beginning. The beginning of something far more destructive than I ever imagined. My phone buzzes on the coffee table, and I glance at the screen. It's a message from Ella, just 2 words, "We need to talk." The message hangs there, glaring up at me like a warning. I look at Roger, then Julie, who's watching me closely. "What is it?" Roger asks, noticing the shift in my expression. "Ella," I say, my voice thick with dread. "She wants to talk." Julie exhales softly, placing her glass on the table. "What are you going to do?" I don't answer right away, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Finally, I drain the rest of my whiskey and set the glass down with a firm thud. "I don't know," I admit, the uncertainty gnawing at me. "But I'm going to find out." As I reach for my phone, the tension in the room ratchets up another notch. I type out a reply, my fingers trembling slightly. "Tomorrow. Noon. The park." I hit send, the message shooting off into the void with a finality that makes my stomach churn. The die is cast, the wheels set in motion. Whatever comes next, there's no turning back. Julie stands, gathering her things. We should go, give you some space to think. Roger claps me on the shoulder. Call me if you need anything. And David, don't do anything rash. I nod, though I'm not sure what rash even means in a situation like this. As they leave, the house falls into silence once more, the kind that's deafening in its completeness. I'm alone again, the weight of what's to come pressing down on me like a vice. I walk to the window, staring out at the darkened street. The world outside continues as if nothing has changed, but I know better. My world has been irrevocably altered, the foundation of my life crumbling beneath my feet. And tomorrow, at noon, I'll have to face Ella again. To hear whatever explanation she thinks she owes me. To confront the woman who tore my heart out without a second thought. I don't know what she'll say, or how I'll respond. But I know one thing for certain, this story is far from over. And the worst is yet to come. The next morning dawns gray and overcast, as if the sky itself is reflecting the turmoil in my mind. I can barely remember sleeping, though I must have, because the sun is higher than it was when I last looked out the window. My eyes are gritty, and my head feels like it's been stuffed with cotton. But the text from Ella looms large in my mind, and the meeting we've arranged is the only thing I can think about. I go through the motions of getting dressed, pulling on a pair of jeans and a sweater, though the act feels robotic, detached. The house is eerily quiet without the usual clatter of the kids or Ella's soft humming as she goes about her morning routine. I miss that noise, I realize, miss it like a phantom limb. I skip breakfast, my stomach too tied up in knots to even consider food, and instead, I grab my jacket and keys. The park where we agreed to meet is just a short drive away, but each passing second feels like an eternity. My thoughts race, imagining every possible scenario, each one more disastrous than the last. By the time I arrive at the park, the sky has opened up, and a light drizzle falls, soaking the earth and the few leaves still clinging to the trees. The park is nearly deserted, save for a couple of joggers braving the weather. I pull up to the curb and turn off the engine, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turn white. She's already there, sitting on a bench under the cover of a large oak tree. She looks different than I remember, smaller somehow, as if the weight of her actions has physically diminished her. She's dressed simply, in jeans and a raincoat, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. As I approach, she looks up, and our eyes meet for the first time since that night. "David," she says softly, her voice barely carrying over the sound of the rain. She stands, hesitating for a moment as if unsure whether to come closer. "Ella," I respond, my voice flat, devoid of the warmth that once colored her name. We stand there in silence for a moment, the rain falling steadily around us, creating a curtain of white noise that isolates us from the rest of the world. Finally, I nod toward the bench. "Let's sit." She follows my lead, and we both take a seat on the cold, wet wood. I leave space between us, a chasm that feels both literal and metaphorical. "I don't even know where to start," Ella begins, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She doesn't look at me, instead focusing on a spot somewhere in the distance. "Start with the truth," I say, my voice firmer than I expect. "That would be a good place." She flinches at my words but nods. "You deserve that much," she says quietly. "David, I never meant for any of this to happen. Never meant for it to happen." I repeat, anger flaring up again, hot and raw. "You don't just accidentally sleep with someone, Ella. That's not how it works." "I know," she whispers, tears welling in her eyes. "I know, and I'm so sorry. But it wasn't about him. It was never about Mark." I raise an eyebrow, my skepticism clear. "It sure looked like it was about him." She shakes her head vehemently. "No, David, you have to believe me. It wasn't about him. It was about me, about how I was feeling, or not feeling. I've been so lost lately. Everything was just slipping away, and I didn't know how to stop it. I feel a surge of anger, mixed with something else, something like pity, though I hate to admit it. And so you turn to him? To some kid who's barely out of school? That's your solution? It wasn't supposed to be like that, she says, her voice breaking. He was just there. He listened, and he made me feel something again, something I haven't felt in a long time. And what about me? I ask, the hurt finally breaking through the wall of anger. What about us? Did you even think about what this would do to our family? Every single day, she says, her eyes finally meeting mine, filled with pain. I thought about it every single day, and it tore me apart. But by the time I realized how far I'd gone, it was too late. I was in too deep, and I didn't know how to stop. You could have talked to me, I say, my voice cracking. You could have come to me, Ella. We could have worked through this together. She looks down at her hands, the rain now falling harder, the drops splashing against the pavement in a steady rhythm. I was afraid, she admits. Afraid that you wouldn't understand. Afraid that you'd see me as weak, as broken. I didn't want to burden you with my mess. That's what marriage is, Ella, I say, feeling the frustration rise again. It's dealing with the mess together. It's not about hiding things or running to someone else when things get tough. She nods, tears spilling over and mixing with the rain. I know. I know that now, but it's too late. I've ruined everything. We sit in silence again, the reality of our situation sinking in. I don't know what to say, don't know how to bridge the gap that's opened up between us. Part of me wants to reach out to her, to hold her and tell her that we can get through this, but another part of me, the part that's been betrayed, can't even fathom the idea of forgiveness. What happens now? She asks after a long pause, her voice small and frightened. I don't know, I say honestly. I don't know if we can come back from this, Ella. She nods, as if she's expected that answer. And the kids? What do we tell them? I close my eyes, the thought of our children bringing a fresh wave of pain. We tell them the truth, just not all of it. They don't need to know the details, not now. But we need to be honest with them about what's happening. Ella sniffles, wiping at her eyes. I can't bear the thought of hurting them, David. Neither can I say, the weight of our responsibility pressing down on me. But they deserve to know that things are going to change. That we're going to be living apart. Her breath catches, and she looks at me, her eyes wide with shock. You want a divorce? I don't know what I want, I admit, the words bitter in my mouth. But I do know that I can't just pretend this never happened. We need space, time to figure out what comes next. She nods slowly, as if the realization is just now dawning on her. I never wanted this, she says, her voice trembling. I never wanted to destroy our family. I believe you, I say, and it's the truth. But that doesn't change what's happened. We need to think about what's best for the kids, and for us. The rain begins to let up, the heavy downpour giving way to a light drizzle. We sit in silence, each lost in our own thoughts, until finally, Ella stands. I'll go to my mother's, she says quietly. For now. It's probably best if I'm not at the house. I nod, not trusting myself to speak. The thought of returning to that house, to the memories that haunt its walls, is almost too much to bear. But it's the kids' home, and they need stability, something to hold on to in the midst of this storm. Ella hesitates for a moment, then leans down and places a gentle kiss on my cheek. It's a gesture that once would have been comforting, but now it only leaves me feeling hollow. She walks away, her figure slowly disappearing into the mist. I sit there for a long time after she's gone, the bench cold and uncomfortable beneath me. The park is empty now, the rain having driven everyone away. The world feels impossibly vast and empty, and I'm left alone to grapple with the aftermath of a life I no longer recognize. Eventually, I stand and make my way back to the car. The drive home is a blur, the landscape outside the window nothing more than a smear of colors. When I finally pull into the driveway, the house looms before me, dark and silent. I sit there for a moment, the engine still running, and wonder how I'm supposed to go on from here. The life I've built is crumbling around me, and all I can do is watch as the pieces fall away. But as I step out of the car, the rain having stopped completely, I realize that I'm not just watching, I'm living it. And somehow, I have to find a way to pick up the pieces, for my sake and for the sake of my children. I take a deep breath, steeling myself for what's to come, and walk inside. The house is empty, but I know it won't be for long. The kids will be home soon, and I'll have to be strong for them. I'll have to find the words to explain the unexplainable. But for now, I allow myself one brief moment of despair, leaning against the door and closing my eyes. The weight of everything crashes down on me, and I feel the tears I've been holding back finally spill over. The sound of the front door closing behind me echoes through the house, a final note in the symphony of a life I no longer recognize. The days following the confrontation in the park drag on, each one blurring into the next. The house, once a sanctuary, now feels like a stage set for a tragedy. I move through it in a daze, the rooms echoing with memories of a life that seems irretrievably lost. Ella is at her mother's, and the children's absence has created a void that's both welcome and unbearable. I'm left to navigate the complexities of this new reality on my own. Conversations with Ella have been sparse and strained, mostly revolving around logistical details and arrangements for the kids. Each interaction is a reminder of the gulf that's grown between us. One evening, as I sit alone at the kitchen table, the doorbell rings. I open it to find Roger standing there, his expression more serious than usual. "David, we need to talk," Roger says, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Julie is beside him, her face set in a worried frown. "Come in," I say, trying to mask my unease. "What's going on?" We sit around the kitchen table, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken tension. Roger wastes no time. "David, I've been doing some digging. I'm not sure if you're aware, but Ella's been seeing someone else, besides Mark." I look at him, confusion etched on my face. "What are you talking about?" "It's not just Mark," Roger continues, his voice low. "I did some checking after what happened, and it turns out Ella's been involved with someone else for a while now. Someone connected to her volunteer work." My heart pounds. "Who?" Roger pulls out his phone and shows me a series of text messages and photos. The names and details are a blur, but one name stands out, Adam Whitmore, a well-known local philanthropist with a reputation for being charming and influential. The messages paint a picture of an affair that's been ongoing for months, hidden beneath layers of deception. "No," I say, shaking my head in disbelief. "This can't be true. She wouldn't." "David, I wish I were making this up," Roger interrupts. "But it's all there. Ella was not just unfaithful to you with Mark. She's been leading a double life." Julie reaches across the table, placing a comforting hand on mine. "David, we're here to help. But you need to know the truth." I sit back in my chair, the weight of the revelation sinking in. My mind reels, struggling to process the enormity of Ella's betrayal. It wasn't just a lapse in judgment or a moment of weakness, it was a calculated deception that spanned months, if not longer. "I need to talk to her," I say finally, my voice resolute. "I need to hear this from her own mouth." "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Roger asks, his concern evident. "Given what we've uncovered, it might be better to cut ties completely." "No," I insist. "I need closure. I need to understand why she did this." The following day, I arranged to meet Ella at a cafe we used to frequent. It's a place full of memories, and I hope that meeting there will provide some semblance of familiarity in this sea of chaos. Ella arrives early, her demeanor as anxious as mine. "David," she says, her voice tentative. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I nod, taking a seat at the table and motioning for her to do the same. Let's get straight to the point, Ella. I know about Adam Whitmore. I know about everything. Her face pales, and she looks around, as if searching for an escape. David, I can explain. Explain what? I cut her off. How you've been living a lie for months. How you've been deceiving me and our family. What could you possibly say that would make any of this right? She looks down, her hands clasped tightly together. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It started with Mark, and then Adam came into the picture. I was trying to find something, anything, to make me feel alive again. Alive? I repeat, anger and hurt mingling in my voice. You had a family, Ella. You had everything. But it wasn't enough. I know, she says, tears welling in her eyes. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. It spiraled out of control. I got caught up in the excitement, in the attention. I didn't know how to stop. I shake my head, the anger building to a boiling point. You should have come to me. We could have worked through it. But you chose deceit over honesty, betrayal over communication. I was afraid, she admits, her voice breaking. Afraid of what you would think, afraid of losing everything. But in the end, I've lost it all anyway. Not yet, I say, my voice cold and final. There's one more thing I need to know. Why Adam? Why not just end it with me if you wanted something else? She hesitates, then whispers, Adam offered me a way out. He promised me a new life, a fresh start. He was persuasive, and I. Enough, I interrupt, the finality in my voice cutting through her explanation. I don't want to hear any more excuses. I want you to know that I'm done. I can't be with someone who's been so deceitful. Ella's face crumples, and she starts to cry. David, please. No, I say firmly. I've heard enough. I need to move on, and I need you to do the same. I stand up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. Ella reaches out for my hand, but I pull away, feeling the sting of her touch like a betrayal in itself. I turn and walk out of the cafe, leaving her behind, her sobs echoing in my ears. As I drive home, the finality of our separation settles in. The revelation of Ella's duplicity has shattered any lingering hope of reconciliation. The life we had is irreparably broken, and the future stretches out before me, uncertain and daunting. When I reach the house, it's late, and the sky is dark, dotted with stars that seem indifferent to my plight. I step inside, the emptiness of the house a stark reminder of what I've lost. The space where our family once lived and loved now feels like a shell, a ghost of what used to be. The phone buzzes in my pocket, and I pull it out to find a message from Roger. We need to talk. Something else came up. I stare at the message, a mix of dread and curiosity filling me. What else could there be? What more could I learn about the tangled web of deception that has entangled my life? With a sigh, I type back, okay. Let's meet. As I prepare to head out again, I reflect on the journey I've been through. The hurt, the betrayal, the final confrontation, it's all led to this moment. The end of one chapter, and the beginning of another, one where I must navigate the pain and start anew. And as the door closes behind me, I step into the night, ready to face whatever comes next.